Hi, I'm Jeff Holden. Welcome to the Nonprofit Podcast Network. Our purpose and passion is to highlight a nonprofit organization in each weekly episode, giving that organization an opportunity to tell their story in their words to better inform and educate the respective communities they serve, as well as provide one more tool for them to share their message to constituents and donors. Our goal is to help build stronger communities through shared voices and to both encourage and support the growth of local nonprofit organizations through podcasting. Thanks to our founding partners for their foresight in helping us transform the way conversations start. CapTrust, fiduciary advice for endowments and foundations. Runyon Saltzman Incorporated, RSE, marketing, advertising, and public relations creating integrated communications committed to improving lives. And Western Health Advantage, a full-service healthcare plan for individuals, employer groups, and families. News is an important element in our lives. We have an innate need to know. We crave information, and all too often what we get is biased from for-profit news organizations that have a particular bent. What happens when profit is not the motive and the news is gathered, produced, and delivered and serves all news outlets regardless of their tax status? My guest this episode is CEO of an organization that does just that. Neil Chase leads the team at CalMatters, the highly respected nonprofit newsroom that explains California policy and politics. Neil knows his news. He's been executive director of the Mercury News and East Bay Times, editor at the San Francisco Examiner, the Arizona Republic, CBS MarketWatch, and the New York Times. He teaches, consults, and trains in a variety of capacities, and it's my privilege to speak with him. Neil Chase, welcome to the Nonprofit Podcast Network.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Excited to hear the stories. You know, the way we consume our news and information today has really changed dramatically from even just a few years back. Traditional linear media like radio and television, even cable, have seen significant declines in usage to alternative media. We're seeing streaming audio, streaming video, X, former Twitter and TikTok, actually providing news and content. And clearly, CalMatters saw something happening 10 years ago when you launched the program. Could you tell us what the genesis of the organization was and how we got to where we are 10 years later?
Yeah, I don't know if we saw something happening or we saw something not happening that should be happening. And I can't take credit. I was not there at the time of the start. But a couple of folks who really care about journalism and about having an informed public, and who believe that government works better if somebody's watching it, which I think we all would agree with. They were looking at the situation in Sacramento, where in the late 1990s, there were 150 journalists covering Sacramento, covering the state capitol, just assigned to be at the state capitol. Some of them were national reporters or statewide reporters. A lot of them were the bureau chief. The Bakersfield Californian had a reporter in the state capitol. The San Diego Union Tribune had a reporter in the state capitol. And these people were all watching what was going on there in a $300 billion government that is one of the 10 largest things in the world, right? And so with the decline of the newspaper business, in the late 1990s, internet advertising became the best way to reach people. Newspaper advertising was no longer a great service.
Right.
And so the newspaper industry collapsed, and it continues to collapse. It's shrinking gradually. One of the first things to go was the Sacramento coverage. And so CalMatters was started to fill that gap, to give people in California coverage of the policy issues and the politics in the Capitol, both things that affect them. Nobody pays a lot of attention to the fact that so many decisions are made in Sacramento about education, healthcare, the environment that trickle down to everybody across the state. But also you vote every 2 years for representatives to go to Sacramento and represent you, and you often don't hear anything about them until 2 years later when it's re-election time. And so the idea was to engage people in understanding what their government is doing, how it works, and give them a chance to get engaged if they want to.
In terms of people who use the product, you have some interesting collaborations. Walk us through a few of those, if you would.
Yeah, one of the early principles at CalMatters was that this is not a for-profit business, it's a nonprofit. We are not going to make a lot of money off of advertising or page views, not that the for-profit businesses do either these days.
Although you do have a significant number of downloads, a million over the course of a month.
Oh, we have a lot of
each month?
people. We have a lot of people coming to us.
Yeah.
But if I was to double my audience tomorrow, it wouldn't change our finances because
Right.
we don't charge people for the work we do.
Yeah, and we'll touch that funding situation in a minute.
But not only do we not charge people, we believe that the most important thing we can do is not get someone to come to our website. The most important thing we can do is get the information that we're doing out to people.
Mm-hmm.
And so we give it away for free to all news organizations in California, newspapers, radio stations, websites, anybody who wants to republish it and put it in front of their audiences. And so when we do a story, it goes on our website, it goes on Apple News, we get a lot of traffic on both. We work very closely with all the NPR stations in the state, including Capital Public Radio. We do stories together with them. Our stories go on their air. We work with public television in several places. We'll soon be working with KVIE here in Sacramento. And we try to help not only to inform Californians about what's going on with their state government and policy and politics, but to help the local news organizations be the ones presenting that to their listeners, readers, audience, because they should be the most relevant sources, and people want to get that information from a trusted local source.
Mm-hmm. And that trusted local source in so many cases is a spectrum.
A very wide spectrum.
Heard you on KFBK this morning with attribution for a story.
Yeah.
So the depth of content that you're providing is really agnostic in its distribution.
It is, although you're right that if you want to reach people these days, you can't just be in traditional media organizations. You have to be on TikTok. You have to be on social media. And then there are a lot of other sources on TikTok, on social media, on YouTube that are conveying information that isn't necessarily vetted, isn't necessarily accurate, comes from a certain position. And it's really hard for people to sort stuff out. So even though there are lots of different media sources out there, we still believe there are a group of people who strongly believe in their local media organization, know where it came from, trust it, and rely on it for news. We're never going to reach everybody, but we want to reach everybody who chooses to be informed about this stuff and cares and might want to get engaged.
As a nonprofit platform, which we are telling stories for nonprofits, I think a lot of people don't give thought to the fact that there are many news organizations that are nonprofit. And, they're meant to give that unbiased resource to the community. How are you funded? Since you're not sold in a typical commercial way with, advertising and subscription, so to speak.
Yeah, it's funny because we tend to think of nonprofit news as a relatively new industry. And then our friends in public radio and public TV say, we've been doing this for 100 years, and they're right.
Yeah.
Communities have always funded local media organizations for various reasons, for news, for children's programming, for music, for whatever is important to your community. But the nonprofit news model outside of public radio and TV is relatively new, and it has been spawned in a lot of cases because this drying up of traditional advertising revenue, it caused the market forces to go away that were supporting journalism, but it didn't cause the need for journalism to go away. We've always needed journalism in our society. It's a part of a healthy democracy. The Canadian government now, if you want to put a reporter in your newsroom covering local or provincial news in Canada, they will support the position because they believe journalism is important to the operation of democracy. Some states are doing that. California has put a program together that's going to be going into effect this year. New Jersey, some other states are doing it, New York. It is an important part of our society. And it was once mostly funded by market forces. It now has to be funded by philanthropy and lots of other sources. And so there are for-profit, there are nonprofit, there are low-profit, there are university-based. We need all these different news organizations just to be able to cover the news people need.
Tell us a little bit about your budget. What is the size and scope of it, and how is it originated? How do you generate your revenue to pay for the staffing and the coverage that you've got throughout the state?
Yeah, that is the source of most of my sleepless nights, which I guess is in the job description for a nonprofit CEO. And we're growing, which is important because there's more work to do, but adds to that strain every year. Our budget for this year is about $12 million. It's going to be more next year because we just combined with a technology news nonprofit.
Congratulations.
Thank you. It's called The Markup. We we felt that was an area where we weren't strong. And now, especially with AI and all the regulation coming out of California, we have to be able to cover that as well.
Mm-hmm.
The whole world is looking at California and how we're going to regulate on artificial intelligence, much as they did on car exhaust 50 years ago. And so I think when CalMatters was started, the initial funders were people who cared about journalism deeply. That's a great group of people. It's relatively small. I think you and I know most of them in this area. And as we've grown, we have come to understand that people who want to support journalism don't just do it because journalism is a great thing. They do it because they care about the coverage of the topics. If you care about healthcare, education, the environment, you want good quality coverage of those topics. You want people talking about them. That improves the health outcomes. It makes education better. And so about a little more than half, about 60% of our funding comes from foundations. They are some national foundations. Many are California statewide foundations. Some are local foundations. We get some money from smaller organizations that are based in a county or a city. We get some money from statewide foundations, and some of the national foundations that care about certain topics support us as well. That's about 60%. 30% is individual major donors.
Oh, interesting.
They're the people who give either directly out of their own funds, or they give through the Sacramento Region Community Fund or one of the foundation, one of the other giving funds, and they are people who care. Sometimes they tell us they really want more journalism in the community. They want to see government held accountable. They believe that keeps their taxes lower, that keeps fraud and waste down, which we'd like to think we do. We do sometimes. Some people really want more conversation about a certain topic, and they want coverage of certain issues. We have to be careful as journalists not to let that support bias or change our coverage. So you can give money to CalMatters to support great community journalism. You can give money to support a topic, healthcare, education. You can't come to us and say, I'll give you money to write about this particular story or do this kind of thing. And we don't involve the funders in conversations about what we cover. We tell them what we're doing. We share all of our impact. We love to hear their thoughts on things in kind of annual check-in conversations, but they don't drive the journalism because our community has to understand that we're doing high-quality, unbiased work.
Not unlike an advertiser trying to dictate a story.
Exactly. This is not a new problem in journalism. It's just something we always have to deal with. So 60% foundations, 30% major donors. The remainder is several different smaller pieces. We have a membership model like public TV and radio. Unlike public TV and radio, our membership is a rather small piece of our revenue. It's about 5%. We have some corporate sponsorship. We're frankly looking for more. We're trying to build that out by having events, including our annual Ideas Festival that'll be coming out May 7th and 8th at the Sheraton Grand.
That's for, as we record this in 24, that would be 25.
May 7th and 8th, 2025. That's right, at the Sheraton Grand. And that's an opportunity for companies that want to be enabling and supporting and be part of these conversations to be there in the room with us at the festival. And then we do sell what you could call advertising or sponsorship positions in our daily newsletter. Our What Matters daily newsletter goes to about 250,000 people around California. It's free, calmatters.org/newsletters. And it keeps people up to date on what's going on in Sacramento, what's being discussed in state policy. And there are organizations that want to be advertising, and they want to reach the audience that reads that. There's a core audience in Sacramento of people who are deeply involved in state government and outside of Sacramento, but people whose jobs and daily activities involve state government. And then there's a broader audience of people who care about one of the topics we cover or multiple topics we cover. And so we try to serve both of those audiences. Frankly, I think the folks who are supporting our newsletter specifically are the ones who want to make sure their voices are heard in the legislative debates. Those ads are often, you might be reaching 250,000 people, but they're aimed at 120 legislators.
I was just going to say, there's only a few people that you really want to see that ad. And I would say the people who probably pay attention as well are those people who sit underneath that white dome downtown.
They have to because we write about them, we talk about them a lot, and their staffers complain that they have to follow because their bosses ask them questions about what we do. One new thing we created this year we're really proud of is called digital democracy. And the idea is that people are so unaware of what happens day to day in state government that we want to make that much easier to access. And so we collect all of the information you can imagine about every state legislator, where their money comes from, how they voted, every word they speak in a committee hearing or on the floor, how they're rated by different interest groups. We put all that information together in a big database. Anybody can use it. We have schools that are using it. We have the person who wants to go talk to the legislature for the first time and has never done that before is using it to research the legislators and see who might align with their their positions. We show you every legislator's alignment with every interest group in the state capitol, so you can figure out who's aligned where and where the money comes from. But the fun part is we're applying artificial intelligence to that data. And we're looking for story ideas in that data. So Senator such and such always voted this way, but suddenly voted that way. Or gets a lot of money from this organization that opposed a bill, but then voted for it. And these aren't indictments of you doing something wrong. They're simply story tips. We don't publish them. We only share them with reporters. But the reporters can then use those to try to build story ideas out of them. And the big change this year in our second year of operation is we don't just want to share with reporters on our staff. We want to give those to reporters all over the state, so that you're a local reporter in a community who no longer has a Sacramento bureau, but you want to tell people what your representatives are doing. We can give you story ideas and data that you can use to do those stories. So it's an exciting way to use technology to make journalism better, and actually we are hiring reporters to do that reporting as opposed to using it to replace jobs.
How many people do you employ?
We have 90 people altogether.
It's a lot of people.
It's a lot of people. Again, go back to my nightmares about paying them all. But most of them are in California. With this merger with the markup, we have a number of great journalists who are in other places outside of the state. Most in California, originally mostly in Sacramento. And as we grew, especially during the pandemic, it just made sense to hire people all over the state, both because remote work was more acceptable. Journalism has always been a remote position. You have to be out covering what's happening in the field. And our fundraisers have to be out talking to the people who want to support us. But also, it's a big state. And if you spend all your time in Sacramento, and you cover a bill on the floor of the legislature in Sacramento, and you're not in Visalia or Imperial County or Humboldt looking at the impact of that legislation on the people who actually live there, you're not doing the other half of your job.
Yeah, you're missing a whole part of the story.
Yeah,
It's the actual impact.
Exactly. So I as much as I enjoy being in person with great journalists and having the camaraderie of being in the office, I think we do a better job because we're better spread out across California than we were at the very start.
How about collaborative efforts? Are there other organizations that you work with from a news source that contribute and make it a better product?
Yeah. There was a time when journalism was very competitive, right? Especially in big cities. There are 3 newspapers. You would go to the city hall and you want to or the courthouse. You want to get the scoop. So you went to the payphone. You took out the little microphone in the old payphone and put it in your pocket, so it wouldn't work until you put it back in. So you owned that payphone. Silly things like that.
Yeah.
It was all about how many seconds you got the story out before somebody else. I don't know if that was ever really relevant to anybody except the journalists. We all fought over that stuff. But now the industry is different. The financial model is different. We're lucky if most communities can support one strong local news organization. Some have more. In a larger place like Sacramento, you've got several, but still nowhere near the scope of journalistic coverage we used to have.
Right.
And so we, across the news business, have very quickly adapted to collaboration rather than competition. It starts with us giving us everything away we do for free to all the other news organizations in the state. But we've built some really strong partnerships. The strongest one is called the California Newsroom. And it's a collaboration among all of the public radio stations in the state, especially led by the bigger ones. So Cap Radio in Sacramento, KQED in San Francisco, KPCC, now LAist in Los Angeles, and KCRW there, and KPBS in San Diego. Those stations and CalMatters all got together 7 or 8 years ago now and did a big project together. We each put 2 people on the project for 2 years. Everybody worked together on it. It became written stories on the CalMatters site and on their websites. It became audio stories on the radio stations. And that led to a thing called the California Newsroom, which is an NPR hub for California. We all report together. We share notes all the time. We collaborate. Hey, we're doing this story. It's coming out Tuesday morning. Great. Can we get that reporter on our radio station Tuesday morning to talk about it for maybe 10 minutes with the host? Sure. Or if you want, give us 30 minutes. We'll bring a couple sources from the story and some of the audio, and we'll dig deeper into the story. And so we plan things together. We do coverage. We do big projects where there's a giant amount of data to be analyzed for a story. And one of us, often us, because we have a bigger data team, will take that story and do the data analysis. We'll break it down. And then we can give every publisher in the state not only a story about something happening statewide, but the data for your particular county or city.
No, that's a fabulous opportunity, knowing and coming from a news background, the expense that no individual entity really can afford to do.
That's right. And even in the days when you had a big newsroom, I was at the San Francisco Examiner when there were 275 people in the Examiner newsroom and 275 in the Chronicle newsroom.
That's a long time ago.
That was a long time ago. Yes, that was the late 1980s. But even at that time, you still had to make decisions about which stories to cover and how to do it and where to put your resources. And now that's even more true. We work with college newsrooms. There's some brilliant college journalists in the state and some great college programs we work with.
How encouraging is that to hear, too? Because we know that we'll have them going forward.
I am pleasantly surprised every time I meet a group of young students, college and high school. We work with high school students as well, who really believe journalism is important. And they believe it in part because they've seen what has happened politically in this country in the past 10, 15 years. They see the changes in the news media, but they follow it and they consume it, and they are paying more attention, I think, to what's going on in the world than many of us were at that age, a few years ago when we were that age.
And refreshing to hear.
Yes, really encouraging, and it is why we put so much effort into college and high school journalism programs, not just as a pipeline for future employees. That's great too.
Right.
But imagine a whole generation growing up with a savvy and understanding of media literacy, what is news, what is not. We've met entire school programs where 60, 70 students are in all the different classes together, and you sit down and you talk to them and you talk about what a high school journalism program, what it could really do for a community that has lost its major newspaper and be the local news source. And there's some really promising
That's a great
ideas
story
there.
in itself, to think that you either have a high school or a college campus that is located in a community that's lost its local news source, and they become it.
I was sitting with 65 kids in the west side, in Norco, in Riverside County, west side of Riverside County a few months ago. And I said, I want you to stop and think about this for a minute. I am currently in the largest newsroom in Riverside County. There's no newspaper or TV station, whatever, that has 65 people. Granted, they're all part-time and they range from age from 15 to 18. But they are the biggest source of people who want to cover that community. And so we had a great conversation about not just covering the school, but the small businesses and the issues in the community and where do all of your relationships go? And we came up with an audience of like 60,000 people in a 5 square mile area, all affected by things that touch this community. And that's a model, right? They can provide that service and learn a lot doing it.
Yeah, and that's the essence of it. That's the beginning of it. If you can get that interest and then the progression through courses, which have to be available and the campuses to accept and understand.
And we've run a great training program for new journalism teachers who want to figure out how to create a journalism program in their school. There are 10 new programs in California that came out of our training program, along with existing programs where the journalism teacher's been trained. And these are a chance to bring journalism to these communities. It's a chance to train these people. But also, the best journalist in a community is going to be the one who's of that community, who walks the streets every day, who knows the people, who knows what used to be in that business on the corner 5 years ago and why it closed. There are many high school students who are more qualified to cover a certain neighborhood than the reporter from the metro radio station 100 miles away who drops in only when a terrible crime happens, right?
Right. And this is a little deviation from where I didn't know about this particular, piece of CalMatters. I mean, it's so significant, and it's going to partly beautifully into this next question. You have a budget. What if you didn't? What would the organization look like if it was yours to build?
You mean unlimited, not didn't as in zero?
Unlimited, yes.
I thought about
no, not the zero.
I thought about the zero option.
The other way around.
The other way around. It's a fascinating question because if I could design, what I would do in that situation is I would figure out what's the best way to bring journalism as a public service to the people of California without regard for how far you are from the nearest city. There are tribal lands where there's one local tribal newspaper. It comes out once a week. The delivery route is like 40, 50 miles just to get to 30 places you drop off the papers.
Right.
And there's just very little, and nobody else covers it unless something terrible happens, right? How would you build quality local and regional journalism across the state? Imagine having a regional CalMatters editor for each of 10 different sections of California. And that regional editor is turning CalMatters national or statewide stories into local relevant ones, is working with the high school and college programs, is working with the small publishers. There's still plenty of small family businesses doing journalism in California. But supporting all of them to make them all better so they can be stronger, so they can keep their audiences and be a place for this news, and doing these kind of collaborative projects back and forth. And that takes a lot more people, and it'll take more money, and it's often harder to raise money aimed at a certain part of the state than at another part of the state, unfortunately. But if I had the chance to build something out more aggressively, that's what it would look like. Then there's a fascinating program right now at Arizona State University, which granted is outside the state of California, but is very active in California. They have offered to take on news organizations where the family running it is done or the company running it is done. It's not making much money. They don't see that there's not a lot of value in the enterprise to sell it. Donate it to the university. They'll operate it as part of the journalism school, and they'll make it a lab. They'll use whatever profits were there to fund some nonprofit journalism work. And models like that are the reason that I think even if the traditional newspaper business is collapsing, journalism is here to stay in a lot of different forms.
Well, and they've got a pre-existing infrastructure that they don't have to learn and
That's right.
Experiment with.
Yeah.
To
No,
figure out if
imagine
it's gonna
taking over
work.
a news business that's been in a community for a long time. Maybe hasn't been large lately, but is there, is
Right.
trusted, has a storefront downtown,
Yeah.
and has some people working there who are known. The other element to this is a lot of the larger news organizations and mid-sized ones are now owned by giant hedge funds.
Right.
And it's not because they came in and decided we're going to take over the newspaper business or some conspiracy. A value investor like that can only buy something when nobody else wants it.
Mm-hmm.
So the reason the Sacramento Bee is no longer owned by descendants of the McClatchy family
Right.
is that the business model no longer supported that. So McClatchy family money is going into some really good work in the Central Valley. The Journalism Collaborative is funding new startups in Merced and Modesto and supporting journalism in other parts of Stockton and Fresno. But these value investors or hedge funds or vulture funds or whatever you want to call them that own a lot of the bigger news organizations, including most of the big newspapers in California, they're in it for the money.
Right.
They're good at what they do. They're not evil. They're just, their job is to make money out of these properties. There are newspapers in this state that are making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year in profit that have no reporter in the newsroom because they're simply producing a newspaper, putting stuff from a corporate company into it and dropping it on people's doorsteps. And there are many of us who will keep getting a newspaper till we die, just like we'll complain about electric rates, but we won't turn off the electricity.
Right.
That business is dying, but it's dying slowly. And that means there are still media companies that have a functioning business, some relevance, that could be turned into a real community service.
And unfortunately, when it's only based on revenue, it's unlikely to happen.
It's unlikely to happen, but as the revenue declines, which it will, there's ideally a pivot point where the company says, okay, we're no longer making much money off of this thing. We're willing to unload it. Nobody else wants it. Oh, this university will take it. It'll be a tax deduction to give it to the university. And maybe there's enough there that you can salvage it. I should mention one other really important collaborative effort, which is called Solving Sacramento.
I was going to ask.
Excellent. A group of news organizations in Sacramento got together and said the same thing that we said at a statewide level. None of us are big enough to do this alone. And so you have The Observer, you have radio, you have community newspapers, you have ethnic publishers, all working together on some big Sacramento projects. And that brings a level of investigation, a level of quality, a level of depth to stories that most of these smaller news organizations can't do on a regular basis. And it's a really important example. This is one of the best collaborations like that in the country, and it's happening right in Sacramento.
That's great to hear. And that aggregated community of people in the variety of elements in the community gives so much more value to the content of the story.
Yeah.
Because it's coming from a variety of different perspectives.
This is a very diverse place, right?
Yes.
So if you have a news organization that is covering the Russian and Russian-speaking communities and the Black community and the Spanish language communities and the different geographic areas as well as the different ethnic and language groups, you're going to have more complete reporting. You're going to be more reflecting. Even in the days when we had giant news organizations in every major city, there was still a lack of coverage of lower income areas, of smaller segments of the population. And so not only are we getting more reporting than we might otherwise have in this economic environment, in some cases we're getting more representative, more diverse, more community-centric coverage than we've ever had.
Yeah, that ethnic, certainly in Sacramento, in that ethnic content and perspective embedded in a story is so valuable because we don't necessarily see it from traditional media.
Right, and we often don't see beyond our own neighborhoods, right?
Right.
I've had people, when I've said something like, CalMatters is here to bring back the quality of journalism we used to have that diminished, I've had people say to me, or you could do better than that was, right? There's no reason you have to settle for what we had before.
Acceptable before.
It's different, and everything about our business is different, but the need for it is still there, the importance of it is still there, and the chance to still do it is a real honor.
We'll be back with more news right after this message from the people who make our program possible. I was in the media business for over 35 years and had the great privilege of working with Runyon Saltzman, RSE, marketing, advertising, and public relations. We collaborated on many different campaigns, but their commitment to the nonprofit sector hasn't changed since their founder, Gene Runyon, started the agency. Over many years and many campaigns, Runyon Saltzman has been committed to improving lives by tackling California's most challenging issues. Guided by research-informed strategies and insightful, creative solutions, RSE develops innovative communications campaigns that raise awareness, educate, and reduce stigma in diverse communities throughout our state and beyond. To learn more about RSE, visit rs-e.com.
Hello, this is Scott Thomas with Cap Trust in our Sacramento office. I specialize in working with local nonprofits and associations. Annually, we survey private and public nonprofit organizations across the country to better understand challenges they see in today's environment. In our more recent survey, we heard concerns about proper board governance, mission-aligned investment, and how to implement alternative investments. If you would like a copy of the survey or to discuss your organization, look me up, Scott Thomas at captrust.com.
I'm thrilled to have Western Health Advantage partnering with us as they do so much to support so many nonprofit agencies in our community. As a truly local health plan, you'll find individual and family options, employer options, plans for CalPERS and Medicare Advantage. From medical services to pharmacy, health and wellness support, as well as behavioral health care, Western Health Advantage has a plan that fits what you need. As an employer, for profit or nonprofit business, individual or family, you can find more at westernhealth.com. Back to reality with a budget. What is the greatest need as you look at it? What is causing you to lose sleep?
Yeah. There are people who will support a specific project. I really want to see more coverage of water issues in California or of education issues. There are not as many people who say, I'd really love to give you money to pay the rent for your office or to pay your CEO or to pay your operations director. And so I'm often tempted to, shut down something and restart it the next day and call it new, right? We'll end the education beat. We'll start a schools beat and say we have a new thing because people like to fund new things. And I'm not giving most philanthropic people are more thoughtful than that. I'm not giving them full credit.
Yeah.
But there's always interest in things that we're not doing yet that someone would like to encourage us to do. And they're often things we'd like to do. It is harder to fund something you've been doing for 10 years that is really important and keeps on. Many funders will say, I like to fund things in a catalytic way. I like to help get something started that couldn't have happened otherwise. Then I hope you'll be able to go out and find other funders for it. Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. And that is not exclusive to news. I know every nonprofit leader has those challenges.
And the shiny new object always gets the most attention. But it's not sustainable if you only get it for a year or two grant.
Right. But when you get that year or two grant, are you going to say no? I've seen people say no. Sometimes you do say no because it would break your business. It wouldn't be the right thing to do. And we are running even though it's a nonprofit, we're running a business.
Yes.
We have to have a budget. We have to have a P&L. We have to make certain targets. If I don't hit certain targets, I have a board that's very angry with me. If I do, they love me. And in that business context, you sometimes have to make a decision that is not just, we take money from anybody and do anything, especially in the journalism business. There are things that we know we need to do more of and we should do more of. We want to do better coverage of K-12 education. It's the biggest part of the California budget. It affects millions of people. I don't think we have enough people on any story, but especially on K-12 education. TK to 12 education. Our board chair helped write the TK legislation, so we always put TK in there. I would like to find more money to support that work, and I will greatly take that money. We have more support for higher education money coverage right now than we have for K-12 coverage. Why would you do disproportionately more higher education coverage? Well, there's a lot to do, and people want to support it, we'll do it. But one of our big fundraising goals for 2025 is to build up support for the TK through 12 education coverage and early childhood education before that, because they're such important areas that we just, for whatever reason, have not attracted yet as much funding as we hope to be able to get to do that kind of coverage.
Well, you just got that plea out there.
I may have.
And
what a coincidence.
And one of the things that we see is the program itself. A lot of nonprofit leadership enjoy listening to their peers, through the people that we interview. And we got the biggest from Pride Industries down to the smallest 100% volunteer organizations, Sacramento Historical Society. And number of downloads, amazingly, in some cases, is similar or greater in some of the smaller organizations.
That's great. I believe that. I learned so much from talking to peers, whether it's journalism leaders or leaders of other organizations, because we're we're all making this up as we go.
Yeah.
We're all learning a lot as we go. Things are changing so fast. In the same way that we have to collaborate on the news gathering side with news organizations, if we as a nonprofit are not collaborating with other nonprofits, then shame on us. We have an industry association of a lot of nonprofit news organizations. I spend a lot of time with people who are leading other nonprofit organizations in the community. We have to have those conversations. We have to help each other through this, and I really appreciate and try to return the favor whenever one organization mentions us as somebody else that could be sponsored.
Well, and as I'm thinking about them hearing this story, they may not be familiar with CalMatters. They may not know that there's this resource out there that even they could repurpose a story into their newsletter or something to their board.
Which we love, right? When somebody picks up a story, if we can reach an audience, I'm less concerned with how many millions of people might see one story as if we have a story about a certain topic and it gets to the people who care about that topic.
Yes.
And the best way for that to happen is an organization that has a newsletter that's paying attention to what we do and says, oh, this is a good story for our readers, or that brings us story ideas. We also publish op-eds, individual pieces. We call it our California Voices section. Nonprofit leaders are one of the biggest markets for that. People like to get their views out there, and they have really good perspectives they need to share. We love getting those pieces and publishing them.
Thank you so much for offering that, because, again, a lot of people may not know about CalMatters and that opportunity even exists, and that's a perfect segue to the next question. How do they find it? I think you gave the website orientation.
Yeah, we're on the web at calmatters.org. We are not conceited enough to expect that everybody comes to our website. So we love for people to sign up for our newsletter. It's called What Matters. We have a weekly one as well. You can get it every day, or you can get it once a week, depending on which pace you like. We also have Dan Walters, who's been covering California for 60 years plus, since he dropped out of high school up in Humboldt County to become a journalist at 16. He's now in his early 80s, who knows so much about California. He writes a column for us 4 days a week. We deliver those in a weekly newsletter. But the website is the best place to find ourselves and get started. We are on local public radio almost every day. You'll hear us on Cap Radio constantly and other places. We are often in local newspapers. We're on TV sometimes. We have a daily 2-minute TV segment we do with PBS in Southern California, which is on YouTube. And usually we use and we do public in-person events as well in different parts of the state, including this event we have coming up in May of 2025. So lots of ways to find us, but the quickest way to start is to go to calmatters.org and sign up for the newsletter, and then reach out to me. I'm happy to talk to folks who find us useful or don't and have some critiques. We get those sometimes in the news business, as in often, but also folks who are doing other things in Sacramento that we ought to know about or ought to be partnering with.
And what I'll do is, for the benefit of everybody listening, I'll have those links in the show notes as well.
That's great. Or Neil at calmatters.org if somebody wants to remember it and type it in.
Well, there it is, Neil at calmatters.org.
That's it.
Like or dislike.
Right. We get lots of both.
Neil, as a former news radio general manager, current board member of Cap Radio, you have a Herculean task, and I certainly appreciate what you're doing and the way that you're doing it. Just with the complexity today of distribution, the technology. You mentioned AI, which is great that you're able to get to that point, because that budget again, that doesn't come free.
That's right.
But with this dynamic landscape that we're in and the distribution necessity for all ages to be engaged, to hear that we have high schools and colleges actually interested in journalism, that just excites me to no end, especially knowing we have the campuses that we have around the state. So for what you do, for what your team does, for all those 90 people every day slogging it through the Capitol and any remote field that we know they're out in, thank you.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that, and thank you for what you do. Right, both with this effort to get nonprofit information out there, and being on the Cap Radio board, making media work in this town is not easy. It's a lot of work, and so I appreciate that.
Well, have a wonderful day, and thank you again for coming.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Thank you for listening to the Nonprofit Podcast Network. I hope you enjoyed the episode. If what you heard moved you, please reach out to that organization and do what you can to help. If you like and appreciate what we're doing to support local nonprofits, please give us a positive review, subscribe, and share. If you're a nonprofit with an interest in participating in an episode, you can reach me at jeff@hearmenowstudio.com. If you have a need for the services or products our sponsors offer, please reach out to them. CapTrust, fiduciary advice for endowments and foundations, Runyon Saltzman Incorporated, RSC, Marketing, Advertising, and Public Relations Creating Integrated Communications Committed to Improving Lives, and Western Health Advantage, a full-service healthcare plan for individuals, employer groups, and families. The Nonprofit Podcast Network is a production of, is recorded at, and edited by Hear Me Now Studio.